The dress fit perfectly, too perfectly. It hugged my ribs like it was sewn from memory, every stitch a quiet echo of the woman I'd been becoming for months. I stood on the pedestal in a room of mirrors, soft daylight catching the ivory silk and scattering it across the floor like broken promises. The seamstress beamed behind me, pinning the final hem, chattering about how stunning I looked. I nodded, smiling because it was expected, but something in my chest felt hollow. Not a warning, just a flicker, like a breeze through an open door you didn't know you left unlocked. "You're going to take his breath away," she said, stepping back to admire her work. I exhaled and looked at my reflection. For a second, I almost believed her. I drove home humming a song I didn't recognize, fingers tapping against the steering wheel like they couldn't stay still. The wedding was tomorrow. Everything was ready. Venue, flowers, vows handwritten and tucked inside my bedside drawer. The caterer had confirmed. The photographer was flying in. My maid of honor had left a voice note reminding me to breathe. And then my phone buzzed. A notification. Voicemail. No missed call. I pulled into the driveway and checked the message, thinking maybe it was a vendor. Maybe something minor. Centerpieces or timing. But when I saw his name on the screen, my heart didn't race. It slowed. A stillness fell over me like snowfall. I pressed play. "Hey, Sienna, I don't know how to say this. I'm not coming tomorrow. I can't. I'm sorry. It's not you, it's... God, I wish I had the courage to do this in person. I can't marry you. I'm sorry." And then nothing. Not even a click. Just silence. The kind that rings in your ears long after the noise is gone. I sat in the driver's seat, keys still in the ignition, hands limp in my lap. I listened to it again. And again. Not because I didn't understand, but because I couldn't believe someone could end a life like that with a message shorter than a voicemail from a dentist. 31 years old. 6 years together. 4 of them building a life that was always half his. And now, less than 24 hours before I was supposed to walk down an aisle, I was sitting in my driveway listening to a man I thought I knew unravel everything in 32 seconds. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just walked inside, unzipped the dress, laid it on the bed, and stared at it. Perfect. Too perfect. I listened to it again the next morning. Just once. Not out of hope. Not because I thought he'd called back to say he made a mistake. Just to remind myself it really happened. There it was. His voice. That same low murmur I used to fall asleep to, now tinny and thin through a speaker, like it had lost all weight. Like he had. He said he was sorry, but he wasn't crying. There was no panic in his tone. No hesitation. Just calm cowardice dressed as confusion. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, the counter scattered with wedding place cards I'd been hand-lettering just the night before. My ink pen still lay there, its tip dry. I looked at the stack of names, all perfectly aligned, and thought, who even are these people? I couldn't remember half of them without flipping over the RSVP. My phone buzzed once. Rachel, my maid of honor. I didn't pick up. I didn't want her pity or her rage. I couldn't take someone else's emotions yet. Instead, I made coffee. Not because I needed it, because I needed to do something that still made sense. The wedding was in 6 hours. The dress was hanging in the closet, the venue staff probably setting up hydrangeas I'd never see. My makeup artist would be arriving at noon to an empty room. I looked at the ring. It sat in its velvet box on the windowsill, catching the light like it didn't know it had been abandoned. I picked it up, turned it between my fingers. Platinum band, cushion-cut diamond, 2 smaller stones on the side. We picked it together. Or rather, I pointed. He paid. He said he wanted me to have something timeless. I took it out and held it in my palm. It didn't feel heavy. It felt like a refund. My phone buzzed again. This time, his name lit up. I didn't answer. I walked to the back of the house, opened the window, and let the wind touch my face. There was a world out there, a world beyond caterers and save the dates and a man who needed a voicemail to run away. And suddenly, I didn't want to be here anymore. Not in this house. Not in this version of my life. Not in this grief. I slipped the ring into my coat pocket, and I started packing. I drove to the venue because I had to see it for myself. Not to make a scene. Not to scream in the middle of the dance floor that would never feel my heels. I just needed to know it was real. That this day, this wedding, this promise had actually existed somewhere outside of my imagination. The parking lot was half full when I arrived. A few vendors moved like ghosts in pressed black polos, carrying trays and centerpieces, their faces drawn with awkward confusion. One of them looked up at me, brows lifting with recognition. I didn't flinch. "Miss Brooks?" he asked carefully. I nodded. "There won't be a wedding." His mouth opened slightly, but he didn't speak. What could he say? Sorry? For what? That my almost husband vanished like a magician with stage fright? That I was standing in the middle of a dream someone else had set on fire? I walked inside. The ballroom was beautiful, almost offensively so. Candles flickered in glass hurricanes. The ivory linens glowed soft under chandeliers. Our names were printed in gold foil across the place cards, scattered now in neat little rows like a tribute at a funeral. I moved slowly, taking it all in. The sweetheart table was already set. 2 chairs side by side, a pair of champagne flutes etched with S and T, a plate of macarons in pastel blush. They'd even lit the candles. I walked up to the edge of the table and touched the back of my chair. It was absurd how much detail we'd fussed over. The napkin folds, the shade of mauve in the flower arrangements, the exact string quartet playlist timed to the sunset. I wanted to hate it all, but I didn't. It was beautiful. We had created something beautiful, and he had left me to walk through it alone. I sat down in my chair, just for a moment. The seat was warm. Or maybe it was just me, flush with humiliation and disbelief. I stared at the second chair, the one that would stay empty forever. And then I laughed. Not loud. Not wild. Just one quiet exhale through my nose. Because there was something poetic about it. This room filled with everything I'd ever wanted, now emptied of the one thing I thought I needed to make it whole. I stood, took one last look, and whispered, "You missed it." Not out of anger, out of pity. Then I walked out the same door I should have walked through as a bride. Except this time, I wasn't walking toward a promise. I was walking away from a lie. I laid the ring on the kitchen table like it was evidence in a case I didn't ask to be part of. The sun had started to dip by then, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor, and for the first time all day I let myself sit. Not collapse, not curl up in sobs, just sit. It was quiet. Too quiet for what should have been a wedding night. My phone had stopped buzzing. I imagined Rachel was fielding the flood of confused messages from guests, shielding me from the chaos with the loyalty I suddenly didn't feel worthy of. I knew my mother was probably chain texting paragraphs that bounced between concern and rage. I hadn't responded to any of them. I stared at the ring. So pristine, so deliberate, like it had never even been worn, like it had always known it was temporary. My fingers hovered above it. This stupid, glimmering little thing had sat on my hand while I ordered invitations, booked a venue, spent hours deciding between seafoam and sage for the napkins. This tiny circle of platinum had made me believe in something permanent. But it wasn't love. It was a transaction. A shiny placeholder for a man who didn't have the spine to end things to my face. And suddenly, I knew what to do. I didn't cry or scream or break things. I opened my laptop and typed "where to sell an engagement ring" into the search bar like I was looking up dinner reservations. The browser filled with options: consignment, auction, private buyer. I clicked the first one with a clean website and filled in the form. Diamond details, band condition, appraisal value. When I got to the reason for selling box, I paused. Then I typed. He changed his mind. I changed my flight and hit send. It was the first decision I'd made in 48 hours that felt entirely mine. I leaned back, closed the laptop, and exhaled. The world hadn't ended. The lights were still on. And somewhere, far away from this chair and this ring and this silence, there were places I'd never been. Cities I'd only seen in movies. Streets where no one knew my name or my story, or the sound of a man's voice breaking my life in 32 seconds. I stood up, walked over to the closet, and began to pack. Not for a honeymoon, not for a fresh start with someone else. Just for me. For once, it was enough. I packed with a kind of clarity that felt almost surgical. No tears, no hesitation. Just choices. I didn't bother folding things neatly. I threw in jeans, sundresses, linen shirts that breathed. Clothes that didn't care where they were going, only that they were leaving. The suitcase was old. Originally bought for the honeymoon we never made it to. I'd spent hours choosing it, obsessing over compartments and wheel durability like it would carry some grand new version of me into forever. Funny how things turn out. I tossed in my passport, my journal, and a handful of travel-sized toiletries. I didn't plan the route yet. I didn't need to. I just needed to go. Anywhere but here. Anywhere that didn't smell like him. I sat on the edge of the bed, still perfectly made from the night before, and opened my laptop again. My inbox had filled with wedding vendors confirming details, sending well wishes, offering final check-ins. I deleted them all, one by one. A digital funeral. Then I opened a new tab. I typed, solo female travel, one-way ticket. A list of suggestions appeared. Paris, Bali, Lisbon, Santorini. Santorini. I clicked it. The price stung a little, but the ring would cover it. I didn't flinch. I hovered over the purchase button for only a second before pressing it. There was something sacred about it. That moment. Like I'd just chosen myself in a way I never had before. Flight? Booked. Departure? 3 days. Destination? Unknown peace. I shut the laptop and stared at the suitcase on the floor. My chest felt lighter. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because for the first time, the pain was mine. Not something inflicted on me. Not something I had to manage on someone else's terms. The ring still sat on the kitchen table. I passed it as I walked to the sink, poured myself a glass of water, and stared at it for a long moment. Not with hate, not even with sadness, just with finality. It didn't win. He didn't win. I placed the lid back on the velvet box and set it aside, like you might place a photo in a drawer you'll never open again. Not out of bitterness, but because the chapter was closed. And a new one, messy, wide, unscripted, was already waiting on the other side of a boarding gate. The night before the flight, I didn't sleep. I didn't cry either. I just sat in the living room with a cup of lukewarm tea, watching the minutes drip past midnight like rain off a slow roof. The silence felt different now. Not oppressive, not hollow, just quiet. Like the kind that comes after a storm, when the air still smells like lightning and you don't trust it yet. There were wedding gifts stacked in the corner, wrapped in silver paper and navy ribbons, untouched. I hadn't opened a single one. I wasn't sure if I ever would. What was I supposed to do with a personalized cutting board engraved with Sienna and Thomas? Established 2025? Use it to slice lemons in irony? I stood, walked over, and carefully cut each ribbon loose. No tantrum. No dramatics. I just wanted the boxes gone. Inside was everything from cookware to monogram towels. Pieces of a future that no longer existed. I took photos of them all, listed them online, and scheduled pickup times. People offered money. I accepted without emotion. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming space. By morning, the apartment was half empty. The dress was still hanging in the closet, untouched since that final fitting. I didn't pack it. I didn't burn it either. I simply slipped it into a garment bag and left it in the hallway with a note, "Free to someone else's forever." I wasn't interested in memorializing a tragedy. I was making room for a life. At the airport, I wore sneakers and a linen jumpsuit. No makeup, no jewelry, just a light scarf to tie my hair back. A woman at the gate glanced at my one-way boarding pass and smiled. "Vacation?" she asked. I met her eyes and smiled back. Something like that. I didn't owe her the story. I didn't owe anyone the story. The flight boarded slowly, row by row, and when I finally stepped onto the plane, I felt something shift in my chest. Not freedom, exactly. Not yet. But the weight of all that had collapsed behind me didn't feel so sharp anymore. I slid into the window seat. Watched the ground crew move like ants below. The sun was rising, pink and orange streaking across the wing like someone had painted a new beginning just for me. I reached into my bag and pulled out my journal. No title. No plan. Just a blank page. And for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid to start writing. The air in Paris felt heavier than I imagined. Not in a bad way. Just real. Realer than anything I'd touched in weeks. The cab from Charles de Gaulle weaved through narrow streets, passing shuttered windows and cafes not quite open yet. And I pressed my forehead to the glass like a kid on a school trip, watching the world unfold in languages I didn't speak and colors I'd only seen on Pinterest boards. I checked into a small hotel in Montmartre, a place with a creaky lift and floral wallpaper that smelled like nostalgia, and the concierge handed me a brass key on a ribbon, not a card, but a key, old and solid, like something earned. I didn't sleep right away. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed, kicked off my shoes and opened the window, watching the city exhale below me, slow and unbothered, with a man walking a dog that looked like a cloud and a couple arguing softly near a lamppost. The world didn't know me here, and God, I loved that. I wandered the streets later that day with no destination, passing patisseries, bookstores, and women in long coats who walked like they owned the streets. I bought a croissant and sat on the steps outside Sacré-Cœur, watching the sky change over rooftops, not thinking about him. Not once. And smiling when I realized it. That night, I had dinner alone, ordering 2 courses and a dessert without caring what the waiter thought. Feeding more than hunger, feeding a solitude I'd chosen. I wrote in my journal about the silence, the freedom, the comfort of being a stranger, not needing to write his name because this wasn't about him anymore. It was about breathing without shrinking and existing without explaining. I walked back to the hotel beneath a string of lights and thought, Paris was never his. He never stood in these streets or breathed this air, and now he never would. The city didn't save me. I saved myself, but Paris witnessed it, and for now that was enough. Florence wrapped itself around me like a whisper. Warmer than Paris, softer in its rhythm, the kind of place that didn't ask you to hurry. I arrived by train, my suitcase bumping along cobblestone streets as I searched for the tiny guest house I'd booked the night before. The building was tucked between a wine shop and a leather store that smelled like centuries. My room was on the 2nd floor. No elevator, just a winding staircase and a key with chipped red paint. There was a window that opened onto a narrow alley where someone hung white sheets to dry. I stood there for a long time, watching them sway, like they knew secrets the rest of us didn't. That evening, I wandered into the Uffizi Gallery, thinking I'd stay an hour. I stayed 3. There was something about standing in front of Botticelli's Primavera that made my throat tighten. Not because I was sad, but because I felt seen. Not by the tourists or the guards or the painters long gone, but by myself. The part of me that once got lost in other people's timelines. The part of me that stayed small so someone else could feel big. That version of me wouldn't have flown across the world on a whim. She wouldn't have walked into a restaurant alone and ordered pasta with anchovies and wine that didn't pair. But I did. And the waiter didn't blink. He served me with the same attention as the tables of couples and laughing families. No pity. No raised brow. I left a generous tip. Not for the food, for the dignity. On my second night, I met Luca. He worked at a nearby bookshop. I ducked in to avoid the rain, and he asked if I needed help. His English was charmingly hesitant, and when I told him I was just browsing, he nodded and went back to his book, but not before offering me a quiet smile that didn't ask for anything. We ended up talking for an hour, not about broken engagements or rings or flights I booked out of spite. We talked about poems. He recited a few lines in Italian. I didn't understand them, but I understood him. The way his voice softened on the vowels, the way he looked at books like they were people he hadn't seen in a while. He didn't ask where I was from. He didn't need to. Sometimes being seen doesn't mean being known. It means being allowed to exist without translation. When I left, he handed me a folded piece of paper with the poem he'd read, scribbled in his handwriting. I tucked it into my journal. No expectations, no phone numbers. Just a moment. One I wouldn't have had if I'd still been planning a seating chart. The ferry to Santorini rocked gently beneath my feet as the island appeared in the distance like something dreamed rather than built. The sea was a shade of blue that felt unreal, as if the gods themselves had chosen it and dared anyone to recreate it. I stood at the railing, hair twisted by the wind, watching the whitewashed buildings grow closer, each one clinging to the cliffside like a secret afraid of being told. I didn't speak to anyone on the ferry. I didn't need to. There was a quiet that settled inside me somewhere between Athens and here. Not sadness, not grief, just silence. Not the kind that hurt, but the kind that healed. The boutique hotel sat high above the caldera, all soft linen and curved stone. My room opened onto a balcony that felt like it belonged in a painting. I dropped my bag and walked out barefoot, letting the heat of the stone seep into my soles. Below, the sea breathed in slow, endless waves. For the first time in weeks, I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't take a photo. I just watched. That night, I didn't go out. I stayed in, ordered olives and feta and a bottle of wine. I took a bath and let the water erase the last traces of him I hadn't even realized I was still holding on to. Then I caught my reflection. Standing in the mirror, towel wrapped around me, hair damp and wild, I stared at myself. Not with judgment. Not with sadness. Just curiosity. Who was I now that I wasn't someone's fiancé? Who was I without the checklist, the timeline, the Pinterest board? And for the first time, I didn't hear his voice in my head. I didn't hear my mother's. I didn't hear anyone's expectations. Just silence. And in that silence, I found something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. A beginning. The next morning, I slipped into a white linen dress, pulled my hair up, and walked through the sleepy streets of Oya. No makeup, no itinerary. I stopped at a cafe overlooking the sea and ordered Greek coffee and honey-drenched pastries. The woman behind the counter smiled at me like I belonged. Like women came here all the time to quietly begin again. I sat in the sunlight and wrote in my journal. Not about him. Not about what was lost, but about what was left. And for once, that felt like more than enough. I wasn't supposed to go to Thailand. It wasn't on any list, just a spontaneous decision I made in bed one night, wine in hand and zero explanations in the other, after something shifted in Greece. I was supposed to be chasing European elegance, but instead, Bangkok hit me like a drum. The air thick with spice, smoke, and life. Motorbikes weaving through tight alleys, neon signs blinking in languages I didn't speak, and music spilling out of tiny places. I stayed in a guest house above a flower market, waking up each day with nowhere to be, no one to impress, just the scent of jasmine curling under my door. The street food fed me better than any wedding tasting ever had, and I laughed when the sky cracked open and soaked me mid-walk, not running or hiding, but just letting the rain fall. One night, in a bar with paper lanterns and no real walls, I sat alone, barefoot and curled up, watching a woman sing in a red silk dress with her eyes closed like she was praying, and it hit me. I hadn't thought about the wedding all day, not once. Not the venue, the guest list, the dress, the ring, or the man who unraveled my life with a voicemail. Just me, Moving, eating, breathing, alive. That night, I wrote one line in my journal. Maybe I'm not running away anymore. Maybe I'm just finally moving forward. It didn't feel like healing, but like becoming. Becoming someone who didn't need to be chosen. Someone who chose herself again and again and again. I wrote him a letter in Chiang Mai. Not to send, just to say the things I hadn't said. The things I'd swallowed during sleepless nights, long plane rides, and awkward vendor cancellations. It was raining again. Soft and steady this time. I sat beneath the overhang of a quiet cafe, pen in hand, journal open, watching the ink bleed slightly into the page. "Thomas," I began, even though I hated the idea of giving him the dignity of a name again. "You didn't just leave. You vanished. You erased me with silence. You didn't give me a conversation, a confrontation, a chance to scream or cry or throw a shoe. You gave me a voicemail." I paused. The paper curled slightly at the edges as the humidity soaked in. And the truth is, you probably think I hate you. But I don't. Not really. I pity you. Because I would have chosen you on your worst day. I would have stayed and fought and rebuilt and forgiven. And you? You couldn't even show up on my best one. I'm not broken. I'm not waiting. I'm not yours. I stopped writing, closed the journal gently. The letter wasn't long, but it didn't need to be. It held everything I'd carried in the quiet. Shame, anger, heartbreak, and the dignity that refused to die even after the rug had been yanked out from under me. I thought I'd cry after writing it. I didn't. I just sat there, sipping tea, rain falling in rhythmic patterns around me, and felt something settle in my chest. Not closure. Something quieter. Like the moment you finally loosen your grip on something you've held too tightly for too long. That night, I lit a match. I watched the pages curl, blacken, disappear into soft ash in the clay dish on the balcony. No theatrics, no symbolic chant. Just me, barefoot in a cotton robe, watching the past burn down to something light enough to carry. I didn't take a photo. Didn't post an update. No one needed to know but me. Some grief needs no witnesses, only release. Afterward, I curled up in bed, the windows open, the sounds of the jungle rising in the distance. And for the first time since that voicemail, I felt weightless. He would never get the letter. But I did. And that was enough. I arrived in Morocco without expectations. Marrakesh was chaos wrapped in color. Lanterns swaying in every direction, voices rising from narrow souks, and spices painting the air with scents I couldn't name. The city was alive in a way that made you feel like standing still was a sin, so I didn't. I wandered. I bought a scarf from a woman with a gold tooth and eyes that saw straight through me. I drank mint tea so sweet it made my lips stick. I haggled for earrings I didn't need and got lost on purpose just to find myself again. But it was on the rooftop that night where something shifted. The riad I stayed in had a terrace above the city. Soft cushions, low tables, lanterns that glowed like floating stars. The air was warm, but not oppressive. A breeze cut through just enough to make the candle flames dance. I'd brought a book but didn't open it. Instead, I stared at the skyline, the call to prayer echoing through the dusk like a lullaby to the soul. A man sat at the edge of the terrace a few feet away. Alone. Like me. A few glances were exchanged. Not hungry, not invasive. Just curious. Eventually, he nodded toward my empty glass. "Another tea?" His accent was British. Software, I said yes. We talked. Not for hours, not deeply. Just enough to fill the night with something other than solitude. His name was Caleb. He was in Morocco for work. Or maybe to escape something too. I didn't ask. He didn't ask either. We laughed about nothing. Shared olives and almonds from a small bowl between us. He told me I had a kind laugh. I told him he looked like trouble. He grinned like he didn't mind. At some point, he reached out to brush a curl from my cheek. And I let him. Not because I needed comfort, not because I wanted to be saved, but because for the first time I felt desirable without strings. We kissed under the stars, slow, unhurried, without promise. And when we parted, there were no numbers exchanged, no expectations, just a moment. A perfect, quiet, fleeting moment. One I wouldn't regret. One that didn't need to lead anywhere. Because not every kiss has to mean something. Sometimes it's just proof that you're still alive. Still beautiful. Still wanted. And that can be enough. The plane touched down in New York just after midnight. The city didn't care. It never did. Lights still blinked like they always had. Cab horns still echoed down avenues, and the air smelled like ambition and old stories. But I was different. I could feel it. In my spine. In my lungs. In the way my feet landed on the airport floor without hesitation. I didn't go home right away. I booked a hotel in the city, overlooking the skyline. I watched the dark silhouette of buildings I used to dream about when I was small. Except this time, they weren't a dream. They were a choice. One of many I'd made without asking for permission. In the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My skin was sun-warmed. My hair fell in new ways from ocean wind and unfamiliar climates. My eyes had lines that came from smiling, not crying. There was a steadiness in me now, like I'd been unraveled and sewn back together with stronger thread. I unpacked slowly. No wedding dress, no ring, just scarves from Marrakesh, a journal half filled, a small silver elephant from Chiang Mai, and memories folded gently between layers of linen and cotton. The next morning, I walked past a boutique that used to intimidate me. Too chic, too curated, full of women who seemed like they belonged. This time, I stepped inside. I tried on a silk suit the color of sunrise. The saleswoman called me radiant. I didn't correct her. I wore it out the door. Later that day, I stopped by a coffee shop near my old apartment, the one Thomas and I used to frequent on lazy Sundays. I walked right past it. No pause. No glance through the window. Just a ghost I no longer had to acknowledge. Back in my hotel room, I opened the email from the ring buyer. The funds had cleared. I stared at the number, not out of bitterness, but with quiet gratitude. That ring bought me more than flights. It bought me freedom, closure, a chance to rewrite every line he tried to end for me. I donated part of it, kept the rest. And then I wrote one more line in my journal. They will not remember me as the girl he left. They'll remember me as the woman who walked away better. And I meant it. Every word. Because I was no longer trying to heal just for the sake of being whole. I was healing because I'd fallen in love with the woman I was finally becoming. The invitation came in a group chat I hadn't muted yet, an engagement party for Thomas's cousin. The name brought a slight twitch to my eye, but not the collapse it once might have caused. I stared at the message longer than I should have, not out of dread, but out of curiosity. Rachel texted separately. "He'll be there, just so you know." I typed and deleted a dozen replies before settling on the truth. Good. Let him be. I didn't plan to go at first, but something gnawed at me. Not for revenge, not to cause a scene, but to be seen. Not by him, but by everyone who had looked at me with quiet pity when the wedding fell apart. The ones who whispered, "She didn't deserve that," but still tilted their heads like I might. So I RSV'd yes. I wore a white silk suit, the one I bought in New York, and walked in alone. No date, no explanations, just a soft smile and perfume from Florence brushed along my collarbone. Heads turned. I didn't shrink. The room was filled with familiar faces, some stiff, some guilty, some too polite to meet my eyes. I sipped champagne, made small talk, accepted compliments, and ignored the sideways glances that tried to measure how much of me had survived. Then I saw him, Thomas, across the room in a tailored jacket, a shadow of the boy I once loved clinging to his jawline. He saw me, eyes catching, narrowing slightly, taking a half step like he might come over, then stopping. I held his gaze just long enough to let him know. I saw everything. The apology he never gave, the cowardice he mistook for kindness, and the years he'd spend wondering what I'd become. And then I smiled, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. I turned back to Rachel, asked about her promotion, laughed at an old joke, complimented the bride-to-be. I wasn't performing. I wasn't proving. I was living, whole, radiant, unbothered. Later, when I slipped out early and walked alone to my car under a canopy of city lights, I didn't look back. Because I didn't need to. The girl who once stood in that man's shadow was gone, and the woman who walked into that room had become the spotlight. I bought the house in Lisbon on a whim. It wasn't flashy or massive, but it had tiled walls the color of ocean glass, a courtyard tangled with lemon trees, and a door that opened to the sound of church bells and seagulls in the morning. I'd been renting for a week when I passed the for sale sign and stopped, like it had been waiting for me. The realtor blinked when I made the offer in cash, and it felt poetic. Taking something permanent, planting roots not where I'd once imagined building a life with someone else, but where I built one alone. I furnished it slowly, with a chair from a market down the street, a lamp from Madrid, and a painting from a boy who sketched tourists near the coast. Nothing matched, but everything mattered. I filled the kitchen with real plates, not Heartbreak takeout containers, and learned to cook again. Not for someone else's approval, just to feed my joy. My journal sat open on the counter most days, pages bloated with receipts, quotes, poems, wine rings, and memories scrawled in pen I refused to edit. People from back home message sometimes, "You're glowing. Is that you in that Vogue travel piece? Can't believe what you've done with your life." But none of them ever mentioned him. It was like the narrative had shifted, like they'd erased the man who left me and replaced him with the woman I became afterward. One evening, I stood barefoot in the courtyard, pruning herbs, the sun dripping low across the terracotta tiles. A neighbor passed, waved, and shouted something I half understood in Portuguese. I laughed and waved back. I was no longer just surviving. I was rooted. In this city, in this home, in this body. In this life I had carved not from luck, but from loss. I took a photo of the lemons hanging above my head, their yellow skin catching the last light, and for the first time in ages, I posted it without a caption, because some moments don't need to be explained. They just need to be lived. And I was done writing footnotes to a story that no longer belonged to him. I turned 32 on the cliffs above the sea. No party, no cake, just me, a journal, and the waves crashing below like they were clapping for something I hadn't yet named. I sat cross-legged on a weathered bench, a scarf wrapped loosely around my shoulders, wind playing with strands of my hair as if it too had learned to let go softly. I thought birthdays would always feel a little hollow after what happened, like they'd carry the scent of what was supposed to be. Anniversaries, babies, promises. But this one didn't. It felt clean, like the beginning of a second act that didn't care about scripts. I flipped through the journal I started in Paris. The first pages were raw, heavy, bleeding. But as I turned them, I saw how the handwriting changed. Looser, freer, less afraid to take up space. There were ticket stubs, a pressed flower from Florence, sand from Santorini sealed in a corner, a doodle of a man named Caleb with a lopsided smile, a wine label, a lipstick kiss, a line and tie that meant something close to freedom after fire. I didn't know what I expected to find in all those miles. Maybe revenge at first, maybe closure. But what I found was something quieter, softer, more dangerous. I found peace. The kind that doesn't beg to be noticed. The kind that doesn't flinch when old names resurface. I closed the journal and stood. Below, the city shimmered gold in the afternoon light. I walked slowly back to the house. My house. The lemons were ripe now. The courtyard smelled like mint and orange blossom. I made tea, sat on the steps, and watched the sky begin to fold into dusk. Later, I would write again. Not about him. not even about me, but about becoming. And if someone ever asked, how did I survive being left the day before my wedding? How did I move on? I'd say this. He walked away from a version of me I hadn't even met yet. And she became the kind of woman you don't leave. You remember. You whisper about. You never get over. Because she didn't just rise. She soared. And she never looked back.